and the peoples will be as if burned to lime, like thorns cut down that are burned in the fire. Hear, you who are far off, what I have done, and you who are near, acknowledge my might. Hello everybody, this is Gilgamesh, and today we are on Isaiah chapter 33, the halfway point in the book of Isaiah. And this chapter is a very interesting one. We're going to divide it into two sections just for length, but it mostly seems to be one coherent thing, with the exception maybe of this introductory verse here that we'll start off with in verse 1 here. It starts off with a woe oracle here, which has been common in this section of Isaiah here. The grouping is probably thematic to put these woe oracles all together, although it's not clear how related they really are to one another. We start here with verse 1. Ah, destroyer, and you have not been destroyed, and traitor, and they have not betrayed you. When you have finished destroying, you will be destroyed, and when you have completed betraying, they will betray you. No one's quite sure where this verse belongs. It might be a final idea from the last chapter, but it doesn't seem to fit particularly well with it. It also doesn't fit terribly well with what follows, although some try to relate it to the Assyrians in the poem below. It may have just been some sort of a short self-contained fragment that was placed here. Now, it does act as sort of a nice preamble for what follows, but it doesn't seem directly related to it. Now, there's an interesting bit of grammar that is in this here. It has this word hoi, which we translated as woe or ah. It has hoi shoded v'ata lo shadud. Note here how the vav moves position in this repeated word here, that when it is between the first and second root letters, it's an active verb, and when it is between the second and third root letters, it is a passive verb. So it goes from shoded to shadud. That's active, destroying, and passive, being destroyed. The next line, most manuscripts read as, they have not betrayed him, but a few manuscripts read, they have not betrayed you, which I think is the better reading here, sticking to the second person and also mirroring the final line of this verse. The word that's translated as completed here is unknown. The main reason we have an idea of what it means is because it is parallel to, and therefore likely a synonym of, the word finished. And there are a couple of ideas around it, but the best seems to be that from the Dead Sea Scrolls, it looks like the nun in this word should actually be a cough. The two letters look very similar. It's just one's a bit wider than the other. Dead Sea Scrolls, of course, are handwritten, and so it's even more fun to try and decide which one it is. Along with this, it is also likely that the cough just before that in the word should actually be the letter bet, which also looked very similar. And this is what happens when you have a script where every letter looks like a box, and that's Hebrew. This verb seems to be setting a basic theme that justice eventually comes. As such, it works as sort of a preamble to a lot of Isaiah's prophecies, though it stands on its own quite well. I'm sure that, when compiling Isaiah's words, the editors had a variety of remembered sayings at various lengths. Not every prophecy was chapter length, and we have some shorter fragments that are preserved, scattered throughout his book. Deciding what goes together and what is a new section is one of the most subjective parts of interpreting an ancient text like this. Some will suggest that it is a science and that they can reliably map each line to individual sources. This sort of thing is nonsense and has not held up well over time to the people who have tried to do that sort of thing. But what follows here seems to be the start of a new poem. We begin it here in verse 2. O Lord, be gracious to us. For you we waited. Be our arm every morning. Ah, our salvation in time of trouble. At the tumultuous noise, peoples flee. When you lift yourself up, nations are scattered. The Hebrew here actually reads their arm, but based on the Syriac, the Targum, and the Vulgate, it looks like it should read our arm, which fits much better in context here. O Lord, be our arm. The word here, to flee, does mean to flee or escape, but it also means to flap the wings, either for an insect or a bird flapping their wings. And it's a bit of foreshadowing for what the great noise is. Isaiah used this same verb back in chapter 10, and I can't remember if I called it out there or not, but he actually uses it twice in that chapter in each one of these senses. In verse 14, he talked about the king of Assyria gathering eggs, taking eggs, and no one dared flap a wing, using this verb. Then later, in verse 31 of that same chapter, he talks about people fleeing. And so we have this bit of foreshadowing here. What is the great noise going to be? We talk about people are fleeing, but we're also using a word here that means to flap the wings, applied to both birds and insects. When you lift yourself up, this line is also uncertain. Some manuscripts have a variant reading here, at your thundering. And that makes a better parallel with the first half of the verse. The Septuagint actually has at your fear here, and the Dead Sea Scrolls swap the letters R and D, which makes an unknown word. But as we're about to learn, the idea of a thunderous noise is quite appropriate here. So verse 3 might read, at the tumultuous noise peoples flee, at your thundering nations are scattered. And what is the thundering? It's the locusts. We come to verse 4. And spoil is gathered, like the caterpillar gathers. As locusts leap, he is leapt upon. The Hebrew reads, your spoil gathers the caterpillar. But this is most likely a spacing error. The your in there for your spoil is a suffix in Hebrew and probably should have a space so that it is a standalone word. If that happens, it could easily be the word like. And this is actually the way it is translated in the Syriac, the Targum, and the Vulgate. And so that becomes, and the spoil is gathered like the caterpillar gathers, which makes a lot more sense. The problem is caterpillars don't gather, but the word also doesn't always mean gather. It can also mean to harvest, which would fit better to what it is that a caterpillar is doing. But the other problem is that it also isn't a caterpillar. The word probably means a type of locust, and the invading army is pictured like a locust plague, and this word represents a locust at a particular time in its life cycle. This same type of language appears for the locust plague in the book of Joel. We have here verse 5. The Lord is exalted, for he dwells on high. He will fill Zion with justice and righteousness. The word for exalted here is used primarily in Isaiah, Proverbs, and Psalms. The idea is inaccessible, unattainable, out of reach. The Lord is beyond us. He is out of reach because he dwells high in the heavens. Justice and righteousness, again, these are Isaiah's two favorite themes. He uses them constantly throughout his entire book. And then we come to verse 6. And he will be the stability of your times, abundance of salvation, wisdom, and knowledge, the fear of the Lord. She is her treasure. The word for stability here comes from the same root as the word amen. It indicates faithfulness. The Biblia Hebraica Stuttgartensia proposes that the to be verb here, that he will be, might actually be an error, and that perhaps it should actually be the tetragrammaton that is there. It's the same letters, they're just in a different order. And so maybe somebody swapped up the order and that this actually should be the tetragrammaton there. In which case, this might have indicated something about the Lord's faithful or faith in the Lord bringing the blessings that are listed below it. That would work well. There is no textual evidence for that, though, so it is somewhat speculative that that's the case, but it does seem like it would fit in context well, especially given some of the statements later on. But here we're having that he will be the stability of your time, and then it lists these blessings: salvation, wisdom, knowledge, and fear. Fear meaning reverence or respect. These are all feminine nouns. Then we have the singular she, which makes it look like it might only refer to the last item, she is her treasure, but I think a good argument can be made that these are all aspects of the same thing, and the she represents all of them, seeing it as one thing, just several different names for that thing. And then, of course, what's the antecedent to her treasure? Well, the most logical inference would be that it is Zion's treasure. That seems like the best antecedent for her treasure. And so this salvation, wisdom, knowledge, and fear are what Zion's treasure is. That he has filled Zion with justice and righteousness, and they're going to have an abundance of these blessings, and that is actually Zion's treasure. Not the gold and silver that the invaders might want to get from Zion, but these blessings from God. Verse 7, behold, their heroes cry in the streets, the envoys of peace weep bitterly. First, here's the word heroes. This is Erelam. We don't know exactly what it is. It looks like it's the same word as Ariel, which was used as a name for the city back a few chapters ago, back in chapter 29. And perhaps this is a plural of that word, in which case this would be the inhabitants of Jerusalem, the Jerusalemites, the Arielites. If that's the case, then this is just the regular citizens of the city that are crying in the streets. I went into that quite a bit of detail back when we covered it in chapter 29, and if you'd like to see that video, I'll link it up here somewhere. But yes, that is one possibility here, is that it represents just the people of the city. It also, though, can mean heroes. It possibly can mean lions or lion-like heroes, or maybe an order of priests. We don't really know what these things are, but they're crying in the streets. And then we have it parallel here with the messengers of peace, Malachi Shalom, messengers of peace, or you could also translate it as angels of peace. And these angels of peace are weeping bitterly. So we have here a case of weeping angels here in Jerusalem. Don't blink. And if you get that reference, you're a real nerd. But the thought here is that this could be talking about an actual locust plague, but more likely this is a reference to the invasion of Assyria and Sennacherib's assault in 701 BCE. And if that's the case here, then the locusts are symbolic of the Assyrians that are coming through and destroying the countryside. And we're saying here that the people in Jerusalem, even though they have all these blessings, and that's their real treasure, that the people in the city are panicking, and that those that should be perhaps their heroes or their religious leaders, or perhaps even just the citizens themselves, and those who should be the diplomats suing for peace, that they are weeping and panicking in this process. But this is Zion, and Zion is protected. And that's, I think, what Isaiah is trying to get across here, is that there isn't a need for the panic. We have here the statement that it is peoples, plural, and nations, plural, that are scattering in fear. So this seems to be that this is a tragedy that is happening outside of Zion. But Here we see that those in Zion are worried that it is coming to their doorstep. And so perhaps Isaiah is referring to those in the city who lack faith. We continue here again with more imagery of outside of Zion, the problems that are going on. The highways lie waste. The traveler ceases. Covenants are broken. Witnesses are despised. Okay, the witnesses are despised. The Masoretic text reads the cities, the arim, are despised, but cities doesn't make a lot of sense for the word despised there. But the Dead Sea Scrolls, Qumran Isaiah, reads edim here, witnesses, and that changes everything. And so that's the translation that I'm using here, that covenants are broken and witnesses are despised. It seems that we are walking away from either political or more likely religious responsibilities. So if we were talking about political, then we're talking about that the Assyrians have broken their political alliances by issuing this invasion. If we're talking about religious, then we're possibly saying that the people have not lived up to their covenantal responsibilities, and that is why the invasion is happening. Now, a locust plague could account for the highways being empty, but it does not account for why covenants would be broken. And so again, it's not clear if these are political covenants, which would be like treaties, or spiritual covenants, which would be like the law from Sinai. If the covenants here are merely a symbolism for Assyria, then it would mean talking about those treaties being broken. But it is perhaps a reference to spiritual covenants. And then we have the line, there is no regard for man. This line's a little ambiguous. It could also be read as man does not regard, or even man does not think. It's unclear if man is the direct object or the subject in this line. So that's why it's not quite sure if there's no regard for man or man does not regard. It could work if it was the subject here, that man does not regard, that is a better link with the idea of abandoned covenants and witnesses, that a man, meaning each man, is not thinking about or regarding the promises and covenants that they have made. That there is no regard for man might be an indication that nobody's concerned about human life in an invasion. That certainly could also be an interpretation. But the verse line here is ambiguous. It could be read either way. I think I prefer that man does not regard, referring to the covenants and the witnesses that are being neglected. As we come to verse 9, mourning, languishing, the land is ashamed, Lebanon withers, the Sharon becomes like a desert, and Bashan and Carmel shake off their leaves. So the Sharon is a coastal plain that runs along the Mediterranean in the west. It is particularly fertile. The Bashan, on the other hand, is east of the Jordan and to the north. The Carmel, we've mentioned a few times here, is a particular fertile mountain area in northern Israel. These are all areas that were overrun by Assyria. And here it sounds very much like the locusts are in fact Assyrian armies. We have the idea that they are losing their leaves, withering and becoming like a desert. This is all things that would happen from a locust plague. But it also tends to happen in war as well. And so relating the Assyrians to a devastating plague of locusts seems a particularly powerful metaphor. Now, after describing the devastation, there's now a major turning point as the Lord displays his power. Going to verse 10 here, now I will arise, says the Lord. Now I will lift myself up. Now I will be exalted. Dramatic threefold repetition here, using three different synonyms for rising up. You conceive chaff. You give birth to stubble. Your breath is a fire that will consume you, and the peoples will be as if burned to lime. like thorns cut down that are burned in the fire. Hear, you who are afar off, what I have done, and you who are near, acknowledge my might. So the first word here, chaff, is a rare word. It only shows up in Isaiah and only twice. Chapter 5, verse 24, and here. Both times it is in reference to burning the stuff. It seems to mean dried grass. The word stubble, that is also there and is parallel to this word, is the more common word for straw, and it's also the term for the stuff that they would use in like brick making and stuff like that. Now, your breath looks like it might be another spacing problem just like before, and perhaps it should read instead, a breath like fire, or a wind like fire. The word for breath and wind is the same word. This is supported by the Targum and the Vulgate. But I actually think there's something nice about the idea that it's their own actions are what kindles the fire. And that theme has also come up elsewhere in Isaiah, that their own actions bring around this problem. But we're clearly talking about the invading army here that have conceived and brought forth stubble. Now, this does sound a little like the locusts here again, that's what they leave behind, but here we're saying that the Assyrian army has the output of their actions, the fruit of their actions, is to leave behind this highly flammable stuff, and that their breath is going to be what sets it on fire. And we also say here, the people burning. The verb here comes from the root saraf. It is the word that is both the word for the fierce angel that Isaiah sees, and also the fiery serpent that he talks about. And they're going to be burned to seed, lime. That word only shows up a handful of times, and we here we explicitly declare that the thorns are actually people. And this is a good verse here that backs up what I discussed in one of my last videos here, that the thorns and briars throughout Isaiah seem to be very symbolic, and we seem to be saying that they are, in fact, stand-ins for people, just as the locusts are stand-ins for the Assyrians. So we have here the people being burned up to lime as thorns are taken and burned in the fire. Now, we come to verse 14 here. The sinners in Zion are afraid. Trembling has seized the godless. Who among us can dwell with the consuming fire? Who among us can dwell with everlasting burnings? Well, this here, the sinners in Zion are afraid. Robert Alter felt this was like the beginning of a new prophecy. I don't think I agree with him on that. I think this is a continuation of the same thought, that there are people in Jerusalem that are panicking. And I think this is actually a nice continuation before Zion is protected. And we have that statement from the Lord that they have all those blessings, and their real treasure is those blessings from God, not the gold and silver. But we have here the idea that there are people in Zion that are panicking. And this makes sense with the 701 invasion. It was a terrifying thing. The greatest army on earth that no one could stand against marches right up to the gates of Zion. They are understandably terrified. These are not nice people. They don't, nothing good happens when they seize your city. And they're well aware of this. And we're actually going to read in the next few chapters here that confrontation that happens. The whole book of Isaiah kind of leads up to it. But they're asking here that who can dwell with the consuming fire and can dwell in the everlasting burnings? They're asking who can survive this. This word for burnings here only used a handful of times. And everlasting burnings, I think they're seeing here the idea that, everything's being destroyed by the Assyrians, and they're asking who could survive such a thing. Why would we put our faith in anything? Because there's just nothing that can stand against this. A sense of hopelessness comes through in those words. Now, I'm going to leave it here because we leave it with this question: who can survive this? And you're going to have to wait to the next video to find out the answer. But I promise you we will answer it in the next one. And until then, please like and subscribe, and I will see you then. Shalom.